Heavenly Father, stretch forth your mighty hand. Show us how to care for our brother. Show us how to love our neighbor. And like a candle, shine your love to let our children know that we care. Oh, oh, oh. The soul of the innocent is crying out. Our Father is giving up. He's plagued by doubt.
Time now for Land Matters with Gloria Brown. Listen every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Jamaica time, right here on Called Out Gospel Radio, COGR Radio. We don't tune in to be informed. That whether it's matters of buying, selling, and subdivision of land, writing and probing will and testaments, acquiring, modifying land titles, and much more. That's Land Matters every Tuesday at 7:30.
Heavenly Father,
don't miss it.
heal our land.
Attorney Brown, it's over to you. Welcome. Happy to have you.
Thank you so much, and good evening. Have a good night. Good evening, listeners, and welcome again to Land Matters. Please remember you may send your questions, your queries, your comments to 876-868-5109 or 876-535-8186. Any question you have, any query, any concerns as they relate to estates or land matters, please send your questions. And if you'd like assistance in getting a title, just send the word title to me via WhatsApp to 876-387-3183. So just send the word title by WhatsApp to 876-387-3183 if you need assistance in getting a title, and I will gladly assist you. But for now, if you want to just send a question for me to answer you now, please send that question to 876-868-5109 or 876-535-8186. My name is Gloria Brown. I'm an attorney operating outside of Winchester Business Center and Halfway Tree, as well as the Jamaica National Building in Ocho Rios. And I want to answer a question that was asked last week that I did not get a chance to answer. The listener wanted to know how to go about selling a share of a property that is held by a joint tenant. And there's no difference it's the same concern you would have whether it's joint tenants or tenants in common. And for those among the listeners who are not too familiar with these terms, because maybe you have not listened to the program before, when persons own property as joint tenants, it means that whoever lives the longer or the longest will own it. So John and Mary own property as joint tenants. When John dies, Mary will own the property, or if Mary dies first, John will own the property. So John, even if John should will his share, and he should, even if he wills his share to someone and he dies first, there's nothing for that person to get. Because when you are joint tenants, the assets will go to the survivor. So 10 persons own property, one has died, the other 9 will now own the property outright as joint tenants, etc., as long as they are joint tenants. When persons are tenants in common, however, persons will have their own shares. They don't have a particular part of the property. You can't say, I'm tenant in common for the front part. We call it tenants in common it's really in equal shares. There's no particular section for the persons to get. They would have to come together and subdivide it. But your interest in the property, your 1/2 interest or your quarter interest, whatever the fraction that you have, that's when, if you should pass on. So John and Mary own a property as tenants in common. If John passes on, Mary will not automatically get John's share. John's share will go to whoever John wills it to. And if he doesn't make a will, it is go to who we call his next of kin, the next person entitled, which would be spouse and children, etc. Or if Mary is his spouse, then Mary will get a share. If he doesn't make a will, Mary will get a share and his children will get a share of his share. So the person wants to know now, how do you go about selling the joint interest? So John and Mary own property as joint tenants. Remember, they don't have any particular piece when they are whether they are joint tenants or tenants in common. There's no particular piece to say that it's owned, but John might want to sell his interest. So he could sell it to Mary if Mary wants to buy it, or John could sell it to a stranger. It's just that a stranger might not want to hold a property with another stranger because what will happen if they can't come to an agreement as to how to share it, etc. But if somebody is willing to buy your interest in the property, you can sell. And that person will automatically become a tenant in common with the other person. So John and Mary own property as tenants in common or as joint tenants, doesn't matter. And Mary sells her share to Peter. Peter will now hold with John as tenants in common. So even though Mary and John were joint tenants, when Mary sells her share, that amount to what we call a severance, and it changes the joint tenancy to tenants to making them tenants in common. You're listening to Called Out Gospel Radio, operating outside of Ocherios in St. Anne. And if you have a question, please direct your questions via WhatsApp or text messaging to 876-868-5109 or 876-535-8186. Okay, please send your questions, or you can even send your question on the YouTube channel. And remember that you are listening to Called Out Gospel Radio, which is a family station located in Ocherios in St. Anne. And the aim of this radio station is to impact the lives of persons positively. And welcome all who are joining us on Land Matters. And remember that you can always tune in via the radio stream or the app in the Google Play Store or on the YouTube channel Called Out Gospel Radio, and you're listening to attorney Gloria Brown. I want to look a little bit at a piece of legislation we have called the Dividing Fences Act, because we know that from time to time we have disputes in relation to how do we deal with putting up a fence. And you have a particular piece of legislation called the Dividing Fences Act. And this legislation was passed in 1888. See how old this is. And this act says a dividing fence means any fence which separates any holding from another and shall be deemed synonymous with the term line fence. So the same thing we call line fence is the same thing they're saying is dividing fence. And it's any fence that divides one property from another. Every occupier of land shall, as between himself and the occupier of the adjoining land, be liable to bear one half of the expense of erecting and maintaining a sufficient dividing fence to separate their respective holdings. So this is saying that every occupier of land, as between himself and the adjoining owner, is liable to bear one half of the expense of erecting a fence. A fence shall be deemed sufficient for the purpose of this act when it is high enough, strong enough, and close enough to prevent ordinary animals other than pigs and goats of the kind kept on one holding from trespassing onto the other. So just the wording alone will tell you how old this piece of legislation is. So it is saying that a fence is deemed sufficient because if it can keep out animals, except if it's strong enough to keep out animals except for pigs and goats. So it should be strong enough to keep out cattle, but it doesn't have to be strong enough to keep out pigs and goats. I don't know what was the thinking at the time, but that is what the act is stating. But so it is saying that each person owning the land, each person from the adjoining landowners have an obligation to cover half the cost of a dividing fence. And Section 6 of the Act states that whenever there shall be no dividing fence between two holdings, or the existing fence is from want of repair or other cause insufficient, it shall be lawful for the occupier of either holdings, by notice in writing, so you need to give notice in writing, to call on the occupier of the other to come to an agreement in writing with him as to the kind of fence to be erected or the kind of repairs or work to be done to make such fence sufficient, and as to the mode in which the work is to be carried out. So it is saying that neighbors need to come together and agree on the type of fence to be erected. And this agreement needs to be put in writing. And each party is going to be obligated to cover half the cost of the fence. And the fence must be what we call a reasonable fence. You don't want to have you have a house, you have your little ordinary little house, and somebody wants to put up a massive fancy fence that's going to cost more than your house. It needs to be a reasonable fence, and the parties need to agree in writing. And if one party is not agreeing, it's something that the court would have to decide. And the Act makes provision for that. If the parties come to such an agreement and either party shall fail to do anything which by the said agreement he has agreed to do, the other party having done what he has agreed to do, or so much thereof, okay, may do for the other party what, so he can do the work that the other party is supposed to do and bring an action to cover the cost. What I really wanted you to know, my listeners, is that each party, when there's this piece of legislation, as I said, called the Dividing Fences Act. Okay, that's DIVIDING, the Dividing Fences Act. And it is stating that each party is supposed to bear half of the cost of putting up a reasonable fence. And when you are putting up a fence, especially when you are in a development, a subdivision, a housing scheme, we call them. Remember that you need to look at your title, because a lot of the titles might state that no fence or hedge is to be more than 5 feet or 4 feet or whatever. So don't just go and say I'm going to put up the wall of Jericho around my house. If there are conditions on your title, look to see, because if you want to borrow money later on, you might have to take off a piece of the fence. So this is something that we need to be aware of, and don't just go and just build and feel that we are protected because it is our land. Just as I've said on this program so many times, that don't just go and build and feel that you can build from one corner of your land to the other. There's provision for you to leave sufficient space to be able to get around your house and to ensure that the water from your roof is not going over onto the neighbor's property. So those are some of the things that we need to consider when we are building and when we are constructing. And remember that when you are constructing your house, you need to get permission from the parish council, even putting up the fence. Okay, I called the parish council the other day and they told me that if the fence is more than 4 feet, then you need to get 4 feet high, then you need to get permission from the local authority. So there are a lot of things that we need to consider, we need to know about in terms of how we deal with our land, because having got the title, it's not sufficient to say, hey, I have a title. There's also a lot more that you need to do. Want to advise my listeners that there's an increase in the NHT benefit. It's 2 weeks early, should have come into effect in July, but it came into effect today. The increase in the NHT benefit. I know that quite a few persons I am aware of have been saying that they are not going to access their NHT benefit until July because they want to be able to get the new benefit that is available. So there's an increase in the amount of monies that persons are able to get under the NHT now as of today. And I'm trying to find the article just to tell persons what the amount is. But we can always, you can always search online to get that information and look in maybe one of the newspapers of today, which is where I found the information. I also want to encourage, especially a lot of self-employed persons, taxi drivers, household helpers, the persons who are vendors, higglers. It's a good idea to pay NHT so you can get a benefit, because it is, as I always say to my clients, it's one of the cheapest loans that you'll get in your lifetime. So it is really a good idea. It really is a good idea to contribute to the NHT. Go in and declare an income. the loan amount for individual borrowers has increased to 9 million from 7.5. So one person can now get $9 million. And two persons coming together, instead of being able to get 15 million, two persons can now get 17 million when they join with each other. And of course, you know that is not automatic. It depends on your salaries. And three persons can come together and get 23 million up from 21. So that is good news for persons who are looking to buy a property. The only concern is that the realtors will tell you, and the persons in the real estate business will tell you, that persons, whenever the NHT benefit goes up, the price of houses go up. So person going to say, I'm not selling my house for 7.5 million again, I'm going to sell 9 because people can get 9 to borrow from NHT now. So the increase in the NHT threshold, we have found over the years, has a significant impact on the price of houses. Strange but true. Strange but true. To an individual who is this is interesting. If an individual mortgage or one person is purchasing a unit at 14 million or less, the NHC will lend up to 12 million, subject to affordability. So it's not just as if you can just get the 9. If you are purchasing something for 14 million, they will lend you up to 12. And the construction of house, you want to build, do a build on own land, you can get up to $11 million to borrow. That really is interesting. So we're saying, so let me recap. I'm saying the NHT, the benefits on the NHT, those benefits came into the increase came into effect today. Okay, the new loan limit for individual borrowers has increased to 9 million from 7 million. The combined loan limit for 2 applicants moved from 15 to 17. For 3 co-applicants, the limit has now moved to 23 from 21. But if an individual mortgagor is purchasing a unit at 14 million or less, the NHC will lend up to 12 million, subject to the person showing that their salary can manage such a loan. And for the construction of a house, you can get as much as 11 million. The wait period for accessing, the home improvement loan has increased from 3.5 to 5 million. So you got a benefit from NHD already, you want to do an home improvement. It has moved from 3.5 to 5. And you don't have to wait 10 years again. They have moved the waiting time to 7 years. So interesting days ahead. Interesting days ahead, my listeners. This might help us to improve where we are living. To encourage your children, I'm encouraging the taxi drivers, the self-employed persons to make use of your NHD benefit by contributing to the National Housing Trust. You're listening to Cogr Gospel Radio and you're listening to Land Matters. If you have a question or a query, please send the question to 876-868-5109 or 876-535-8186. And I thank the persons who continue to listen and to support this radio program. The station, Cogr Gospel Radio, is located in Ocho St. Anne, with its aim to impact the lives of persons positively. And we thank you so much for tuning in this evening. If you're going to put up a fence, and we're looking at the Dividing Fences Act, if you're going to put up a fence, ensure that you have a surveyor give you some guidance. Don't follow the neighbor's fence and say everybody's fence is like this. So I'm going to be building because theirs might be straight and yours might have a slant. Don't just, or sometimes even the old fence that you have taken down to put up your new one, if you have never seen a surveyor's report to say the fence was in the right place, it might suit you to get a surveyor just to give you an opinion as to whether or not where the fence was is correct and whether or not where you're putting it now is in fact correct. So it suits you always before you do anything in relation to construction, whether it's a house, whether it's a fence, it suits you to get the opinion of a commissioned land surveyor. And you can always check for the commissioned land surveyors by just going online and just put commissioned land surveyors in Jamaica. Just commissioned land surveyors Jamaica, and you get the names and the numbers for all of them, and then it might suit you to just look and see. So you're in St. Elizabeth, just look and see if the ones that are in St. Elizabeth. Because if you take them from Kingston to come down to St. Elizabeth, it might cost you a little bit more. So we thank listeners who sent the question about the tenancy. And note that I have said that even though we have the joint tenants and tenants in common, I encourage my listeners, especially my older listeners, as part of your estate planning, you want to add the children to your title, the names of the children to your title, then take a life interest, which will allow you to, it allows you to have your cake and eat it. So while you are the life tenant, your lawyer will prepare a document for your children to sign to say if you sell the property during the life tenancy, the proceeds are yours. Or if you mortgage it, then the mortgage proceeds are yours. But when you put on the title, so the title will say to Peter Black and Mary Black as joint tenants for the terms of their natural lives and after death to June, May, April. Those are your children. So if anything should happen to the parents, the children don't have to go and probate a will. They just do an application to note the parents' death and the property will automatically come to them. The thing, one of the disadvantages of that though is that when you put on the children like that now, you can't take them off afterwards. You could sell the property, yes, but you can't just say I'm going to give it to somebody else. So think about it carefully. Think about it carefully when you're putting anybody on your title. And this is something that I want persons to think about as well. Now that the NHT benefit has increased, think carefully about it, because a lot of times I might have auntie or I have my brother and he has been paying NHT, but he's going abroad to live now and he's not going to use his benefit. So he has given me the benefit and I put his name on the title. First thing I want you to discuss with NHT, if you really have to put brother's name on the title, if brother is giving you the benefit, ask if you really have to, because I don't see why you should. Okay, but the NHT might insist. If that is so, let your lawyer do a declaration of trust to say you are holding on, that brother is holding on trust for you and has no interest in the property. Because I've seen situations, so many times I've seen situations like that where later on you have built up the house and you have put up a nice mansion, brother only gave you his benefit, has not given you a dollar, and then because brother's name is on the title, he's now asking for his half share. Or insist to the NHT that if brother goes on, you want brother to have a 1/100 share or a 1/10 share or 1/50th share, a very small share. If they insist that brother's name should go on. That is something I want my listeners to think about seriously as well. If the NHT is insisting that the person who is giving up their benefit to you, whether your mother or whoever, is going to go on the title, then insist that the person should get just a very small share of your interest in the property, not a half and half, not joint tenants, definitely. And so definitely tenants in common with a smaller fraction than yours, maybe a 1/50th share in the property. And also I would encourage you to do the declaration of trust to show that that person has no interest in the property, and let your lawyer prepare a transfer for the person to sign to take their name off whenever you're ready. And remember, the NHC won't allow you to do anything with that property, or if the person's name is on it, they will want you to pay off whatever that person is owing before they would allow you to even take the person's name off. But always insist and say that you don't see why the person's name should be on. And that's why your lawyer to represent you in relation to ensuring that your interest is protected. But I want persons to look out, listen out, be careful. Because when you're getting the benefit, everything is it's cozy. Everything is fine when my brother is giving me his benefit for me to buy the house because he's not going to use it because he has a house already or he's going abroad. And I've got the benefit, his name is on the title. No, I want him to take off his name so I can put my children's names on it. And he's insisting that he wants a share of the property, even though he never paid a dollar in mortgage. Or he's insisting that he wants back his benefit. So I want persons to think carefully when you're adding anybody to your title, even your very children. Remember that when you add note, I won't say remember, note that when you add persons to your title, these persons will get an interest in the property. So many times I see people come into my office to say, I want to take off my wife, or I want to take off my husband or my sister or my child, because but they never know that a name on it, and that can happen, yes. And they never contribute anything. So I don't see why the name can't just come off. If I always say to them, if you go out the road and meet a stranger and put them on your title, that person has an interest in your property, and you can't get that person's name off the title without the person's consent or without getting a court order. An order from the court is why I'm saying get a lot of protection when you are doing things like these. Let your lawyer do a declaration of trust, let your lawyer do a transferring the interest of that person to you, and let the lawyer ensure that that person gets a very small fraction of the property, not a large, not a great interest, not a big fraction, half and half with you, and insist that you be tenants in common. So if you should pass, that person does not automatically get your share of the property. I never ever go into a session without encouraging my listeners to make their wills. I'm begging you, listeners, make your wills. As a people, we're not making our wills, and because of that, we're having a lot of conflict. We're having a lot of conflict. Okay. I think somebody's asking. Somebody wants to ask a question, but I'm not picking up the question. But I will double check again. Yes, but I want to encourage my listeners to sort out your estate, make your wills. Yes, I think I'm seeing the question now. I know that both neighbors have encroached on my land. What can we do to correct that? If the neighbors have encroached for more than 7 years, more than 12 years, then you can't get it back. They would now own it. If they have not encroached for more than that, then you need to probably move your fence if you can come to an agreement with them. But if they are there for more than 12 years, you can't. What if the owners are outside of Jamaica and you have no contact for them? Then you might have to take the cost of building the fence yourself, because you need to have an agreement in writing with them. That's a part of the challenge. Is there any consideration for amending the dividing fences act, in the time we are living in, building a wall at 4 feet when the nation is so brutal? No, the act doesn't say you need to build a wall at 4 feet. No, not at all. The act doesn't speak to the height of the wall. It's the parish council that will impose these conditions. So the dividing fences act doesn't speak to the height of a wall. Yes, but we notice that the walls are going higher and higher, especially around the gated communities. There's a local authority that will tell you how high the wall must be. Because even though they are saying as well that for your security purposes, you don't need to make the wall too high. People need to be able to see over it and what is happening. But we could also put a case for the very opposite, that you need it to be so high that nobody can scale it as part of your security. But the act doesn't speak to the height of the wall. It just speaks to the obligations that persons have. I thank you, Ms. Clark, for your questions. But if persons are encroaching on your property, which is why I say it's important to have your surveyor's report. If you have found out early, you can do something about it. If it's too late, then you might just have to survey over your land and keep what you have and forget what you have lost. Well, time flies quickly. Thank you so much, my listeners, for contacting me and for being in tune with this program, Land Matters, on Called Out Gospel Radio. Thank you to the Called Out Gospel Radio family for allowing me the privilege to serve the listeners on this Land Matters, and I look forward to sharing with you again next week, Tuesday at 7:30, God willing. Please continue to support Called Out Gospel Radio. Have a good day.
This is Called Out Gospel Radio in Ocho St. Anne, Jamaica. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned. And that was was the program Land Matters with Gloria Brown, attorney Gloria Brown. Meet her every Tuesday right here on Called Out Gospel Radio, 7:30 p.m. Jamaica time, right here on Called Out Gospel Radio, COGR. Tune in to be informed whether it's matters of buying, selling and subdivision of land, writing and probing will and testaments, acquiring and modifying land titles, and much more. See you next week. Time for Called Out Gospel Radio is 8 o'clock.
Shine your love to let our children know that we care.